and then I'm recording it too. Okay. All right, everybody, here I am with Representative Steve King, who is tearing it up once again at CPAC, always something. Last year we talked to him, and in the ensuing year, one thing I realized over this last year is that you have turned into a little bit of kind of a villain for the press, and I'm trying to pinpoint exactly when that happened, but it might have been when that Gadsden flag went over the side of the house there, and everybody saw it, and the great march across the way, and you kind of stood in opposition to that. So how do you feel about being labeled like the extremist now?
Well, I've gone out before, and if you can go as far out on the branch of truth as you want to go, and they have yet to invent the saw that'll cut that branch off. And so part of what I do is I follow my convictions, and I go boldly because there's not time to look over your shoulder and see if anybody follows. And then I go out on the end of that branch of truth and wave my arm and say, it's safe here, guys. Come on out and join me. And then what I've noticed as a pattern is that if it's easy, somebody else is doing it. And if I dive into something that's hard but principled, over time, if we're going to accomplish that goal, it'll start to look easy. Then I'll have a lot of company. That's when somebody else essentially takes it over, and it gets a little boring for me when it gets easy.
Well, there you go. So currently, you're doing the same thing. Again, though, with Obamacare, you have an amendment coming up. Can you explain to me what you're doing and why we need to put the pressure on the Republican side to get this done?
Well, it's this, that I drafted the repeal to Obamacare the same day that it passed. I have pushed hard on this. Michelle Bachmann deserves a lot of credit. She did the same thing. Within 3 minutes of the time that mine came down, hers came down. But it fell to me to push the discharge petition last summer. I did. We got 178 signatures on the discharge petition. That was an essential tool to winning the majority in the 2nd of November in the election. We did that. Now this is all on schedule with plans from last March. Then I said, we'll win the majority, then we'll step in and we'll cut off all funding to implement or enforce Obamacare. I made the argument consistently from about June on of last year. I wanted also H.R. 1, the highest priority bill, to be the repeal of Obamacare here in this new majority Congress. Well, it was H.R. 2. I'm not quibbling. I'm happy that we brought it as a very high priority, and every Republican in the House voted to repeal Obamacare, and it was bipartisan. 3 Democrats came across. In the Senate, they pushed a vote in the Senate, and even though it failed, it would have taken a closer vote. Every Republican voted to repeal Obamacare. Now we have the CR, the continuing resolution. That was a continuing resolution that was passed by the Pelosi Congress last December that extended our government funding until March 4th of this year. In that, they had taken out what otherwise would have been in $1 billion in funding that would have gone to fund Obamacare. Democrats agreed to this. Well, now we have perhaps $1.2 billion in funding that would otherwise go into the CR. I'm being told that it will be written into the bill and it'll have to be taken out by amendment. Only $1.2 billion. Now, so then we'll be able to say we had a vote, we had a debate, and we unfunded Obamacare. But the problem is, that's 1% of the problem, not 100% of the problem. The money that's really there, the real money, is the funding that is automatically appropriated in the Obamacare legislation itself. And an unconventional method that Democrats use, and a deceptive method, but we just got the score back on this yesterday. And there's $105.5 billion that automatically is appropriated by the Obamacare legislation that, under the scenario we're working with now, goes forward, and Obama would use all of it to implement and enforce Obamacare. The roots of this cancerous tumor would go down deeper and deeper, so we would be cutting out 1% of the funding going forward, but not touching all of that money that's automatically appropriated. I have language, and I've always proposed language, to cut off all of the funds that are going forward and all the funds that have been automatically appropriated in Obamacare. There's a precedent for it, and there are several, but the one that's the clearest is the way the House shut off the funding to the Vietnam War in 1973 and 4. And in fact, one of the tools they used was a continuing resolution, and it said notwithstanding any other section of the code, any funds appropriated in this bill or heretofore appropriated shall be used for offensive or defensive operations to aid in any way the military operations in Vietnam or in the surrounding countries, just to summarize it. That foundational language is what we use to draft my amendment, and it is subject to a point of order if it's an open rule on the appropriations bill coming to the floor. But leadership has the prerogative to write it into the base bill. There will be other provisions that, if they were amendments, would be subject to a point of order and could be gavelled down on the floor.
Right.
They also have the prerogative to protect my amendment by rule and by an action of the Rules Committee. I'm asking that leadership write my language into the bill, and failing that, I'm asking the Rules Committee and those who influence the Rules Committee, leadership, to protect my amendment so we can have a debate and a vote on the floor. If that doesn't happen, Obamacare's funding, 99+% of it will go forward. Obamacare will be implemented, and we will perhaps say we voted to unfund Obamacare while $105.5 billion goes forward to fund it.
Okay.
Now,
$100 billion we're talking. So the problem is, right now on the Republican side, why wouldn't the Rules Committee be for this?
The Rules Committee should be for this, and I believe, of course, the leadership should be for it. And so in the end, they might make arguments about process and procedure and House rules. I can argue against any one of those arguments about process, procedure, and House rules. And in fact, they had some staff that must have been deployed that said, they made the argument that even if we do so in the House, it would violate Senate rules. Not true. It doesn't violate Senate rules. There isn't a provision against it. We send it over from the House. The Senate can take it up. Now, the Senate may not pass it, but if we are going to limit the actions of the House to passing legislation that we think the Senate or the President will approve, there is no reason to come to work in the day.
Right. So basically, essentially the argument is that it's impolite.
In the end, it's this, that my initiative will eventually force a showdown between the House and the Senate, or potentially the House, the Senate, and the President. If the President elects to veto such legislation, he would be taking a proactive step to shut down the government in order to protect his pet project with his name on it, Obamacare.
So what the Republicans don't want is they don't want a government shutdown because they are afraid politically they'll be tagged with shutting down the government instead of Obama being tagged with it.
And they're informed by one incident, which is when the shutdown took place in '95 under Newt Gingrich, that they believe that House Republicans lost that argument. And so I would say, first of all, is that the scope of their political science? And the second base is political science is not a science. There's nothing exact about it. If you have one data point or two data points, it is not an axiom. It's a new time with new people, and it's an entirely different issue. 2/3 of Americans want to repeal all of Obamacare, and that means shut off the funding to Obamacare, all of it. And furthermore, if it comes to a showdown with the President, there isn't any rule that says the President wins. The entity that wins is the one who's standing when the dust settles after the fight, and the one who has the support of the American people at that point. I've always argued we have to sustain our argument with the American people. We need to have an open debate. That's why I'm making this debate. Our public will get dispirited and think Congress is not willing to take on the challenge if we don't put this up for a vote.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We'll try to get this news out to everybody. And so thank you, Representative King, for taking us again, and thanks for showing up at CPAC again.
Well, thank you a lot. And, you know, it's been a whole year since I've seen you, and let's not let it be that long next time, okay?
Okay, I'll do what I can.
Thanks.
Thank you.